Alright, so this video is kind of unfortunately titled because I made this video pretty much directly after my second to last Type Soul video, like a week and a half ago, and then some drama came out after I had already uploaded and scheduled this video. So now the title looks like I'm talking about something completely different, being some recent drama. This video was supposed to be on Setro sending me his lore document stuff, so I could tell you guys the actual lore that Type Soul has, because it's completely unique, but now I have to address the title because apparently some more drama broke out, and I don't know any of it because I don't really care and I didn't read any of it. So regardless, enjoy the video and just keep your mind open. Recently, I made a video talking about how Type Soul has lore. After I finished that video, I decided to talk to Setro about the game's lore, and in today's video, I'm going over all of the lore that Type Soul has, now confirmed by Setro, who wrote all of it. Make sure to subscribe, since only about 20% of the people watching this video right now are actually subscribed. And also, I'm live on Twitch. Come watch me on Twitch. I'm live on Twitch Monday, Wednesday, every other Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am live on Twitch. I'm doing stuff, so let's go watch my stream. Anyway, let's get straight into it. Alright, so starting out, Type Soul actually does have its own unique lore, so ignore everything I said about the Type Soul verse being like the Bleach verse with OC inserts. It's more like an alternate universe. So any characters who exist in Bleach but not Type Soul kinda just don't exist. I was correct in assuming most of it is just Bleach fan fiction though, because it is pretty much just Bleach fan fiction, but it does go pretty deep. The first time period was the CC or closed community time period for Type Soul. This was all in pre-release when the devs and testers had lore characters which were more prominent. So in this time, the first king of Reaconteur was Reaconteur. He was then challenged by Josh Jaggerjack, who was just a, Type Soul and spec player, who would then become the second king of Reaconteur after defeating Reaconteur, and they called him the Bone King because he used the Bone Resurrection. The same thing would happen again with Cal and Jaggerjack challenging him, and since he used the Slash Resurrection, he was named the Tiger King. Now, I did say that they might be brothers because they do share the same last username, but sadly they aren't. They just both use the Jaggerjack clan, and I guess they didn't write this into lore at all anywhere, despite the fact that they literally have the same last name. Now, the Tiger King would appoint Min Stark as Espada #1 during this time, as the king. Now, during this time as an Espada, Min would get his hands on 3 Hogyoku fragments, and keep in mind, this was back when they were super rare, so 3 was crazy back then, because when I first started playing, when you had to do like 170 raids to get your Bankai and all that, you couldn't even get like 1 Hogyoku fragment. You got 1 from like 100 raids, and then you'd get jumped for it instantly. Same with skill boxes. Anyway, back then with 3, you could make a wish to Siren. Now, Siren was the original scripter and owner of Type Soul, so this comes back, but Min wished for Stark guns to replace his normal weapons, which would become his spec. He then challenged the Tiger King to a 1v1 with his new gun spec, and won, titling him the new Setro King and the current most recent king of Reaconteur. So that's essentially how everyone on the Reaconteur side of things happened. As for Quincy's, it's actually quite a bit different in comparison to how Bleach operates. The Almighty, for example, isn't just a power used by the Quincy King, but in Type Soul, the Almighty is actually a force of power, which chooses who the Quincy King is when needed in a time of struggle and strife for the Quincy's. So basically, the Almighty will just come down and give its power to a new chosen king every once in a while. Now, the first Quincy King is Data Bach, who was originally a Soul Reaper and member of Squad 0 before being chosen by the Almighty and being converted into a Quincy. Over time, as the Almighty chooses new kings when time of service are needed, the next king of the Quincy's in order are going to be Wonk Bach and then Kaido the Death Dealing, which Kaido the Death Dealing is the lore character of K1 or Killua, the developer who also worked on Deep Woken, as many of you may know. He's also responsible for making a lot of what people would call anime slop, but I kind of like his anime slop. Now, a major part of the lore is the dimensional split, which was actually just the game getting leaked. They wrote Siren, the old owner, leaking the game into the lore. Because if you guys don't remember, Siren basically, he leaked the entire game on like the Roblox toolbox once he got kicked out of ownership because he was mad. So he kind of just like leaked everything and all the copy games came out. Now, this is completely off topic, but can we talk about how funny it is he got kicked out of his own game? What do you mean you get kicked out of your own game? For reference, he had full ownership. It's not like there's a holder account that a bunch of devs have access to and maybe someone changed the info on it. It is like, he owns the account that owns the group and owns the game completely, and he just let himself get voted out of ownership, and instead of just saying no, he decides to leak the game. Like, what are you doing? You're an idiot. I'm just not letting that slide, bro. If I own my game and I get voted out of ownership by the devs that I have under contract, that's just not happening. But then again, the Type Soul devs weren't smart enough to get contracts for this kind of thing, so it ended up being way bigger than they could handle, and because of that, there were a lot of issues with like leaking. So essentially, he used the power of the Soul King and the Hogyoku to split the dimension infinitely, resulting in an infinite multiverse, which those multiverses are the Type Soul clone games, and now that multiverse has resulted in basically all of the non-canon additions to the game. And it's also why there are infinite Hogyoku fragments in-game, and not just the Hogyoku, like in actual Bleach, where there's just one Hogyoku. Now it's Hogyoku fragments, and there's infinite pieces of it, which is the explanation for why they're so common now, as well as for why they're in shards, because, you know, the multiverse was created. But actually, this is the only retcon in the lore, because they said, or at least in the document and the stuff that Setro sent me, he said that this is the reason why there's fragments of the Hogyoku instead of just the Hogyoku. But the Hogyoku has always been fragments in the game, so I guess this is just their in-lore explanation and a retcon of what was previously unexplained before. So, because obviously there are Hogyoku fragments before Siren licked the game and after Siren licked the game, but this is the lore for how or why there's Hogyoku fragments. But basically, all of the non-canon additions to the game are just infinite multiverse probability causing things to seep into our reality over time. So technically, Goku is possible in Type Soul. Anyway, along with that, the lore explanation for Virgil being in the game is actually just hell. Since he can travel interdimensionally and he's half a demon who can easily access hell, he's able to travel between the hell multiverse and just kind of ended up in the version of hell that resides within Type Soul. And honestly, that's probably one of the best explanations for anything in this game so far, so I'll allow Virgil to exist in game without complaining from now on. The addition of the Yamato is probably what I said in the last video though, but for those of you who don't know, when the Yamato was broken in between Devil May Cry 1 and 4, essentially just little shards of it drifted into our reality because they kind of just cut multi-dimensional portals, and then those shards were used to make an alloy which would become the Yamato sword that you have in game, which is technically a weaker version of the Yamato that Virgil has because it's not the actual sword, it's just a sword made with part of the actual sword. Anyway, as for the reason multiple people can have the same powers and partials, specifically Quincy's, when, you know, the Quincy's, their letters are supposed to be Sternritter exclusive in Bleach. So in Bleach, Quincy has one power per Quincy. So the Quincy that uses the Superstar, the Quincy that uses the Zombie Shrift, there's only one of those, and every other Quincy has no Shrift, or Sclave Rai, or anything like that, right? The powers are kind of forces like the Almighty is, where people can channel that force, but then the Sternritter for each letter is the strongest user of it in the case of the Quincy's in-game. So while 1,000 people can use Burn, the B Sternritter would have the closest connection to that power and be capable of using it to its fullest potential, which is also why the Sternritters used to get specs and special abilities, because their specs, or their spec would be based on the Sternritters, would be given special stuff, like how B for Burn would get like a auto-tracking 4th Burn move, and it was really good. And there was some similar stuff for Soul Reaper Captains and the Espadas, but the difference was that their abilities given as specs weren't really given based on their previous abilities. Because yeah, the Sternritters would get special abilities in relation to their abilities, but the specs and stuff given to Soul Reapers and all that were kind of just given based on what you'd like. Like, you could just ask for stuff if you got a wish, unlike the Sternritters, who had their specs locked to their element. So, like, imagine being a Sternritter for, like, G and you're Glutton, right? So you get special Glutton moves as part of, like, your advanced Shrift, but then you see, like, a Soul Reaper Captain or an Espada or something, and then they're not getting stuff that's based on their element, they're just getting, like, nukes and Ceros and the power of Christ, because that was actually one of the specs in CC for some reason. I don't know. But yeah, they would just get basically whatever they wanted, but then the Quincy's would get all this other stuff that was already based on their abilities. And this kind of goes pretty deep because the Quincy's were actually always hated, because back in CC testing, and if you played early release Type Soul, Quincy's were always the strongest, right? I think a lot of people know that. The Quincy's at one point were the strongest race in the game. And even during CC testing they were, which is why the Soul Reapers and the Arankars would actually team up against them, and then they would start hosting raids in KT just so that way people couldn't get progress towards their like Shrifts and their Sternritter stuff, because like people have just always hated the Quincy's. It's crazy. It runs really deep. Now Type Soul would also rather add on to their updates rather than retconning, so when we look at Deep Woken, a lot of their lore is retconned into the story. So like whenever they add a new race or new races into the game, they essentially just always existed, just not in playable form. Instead, Type Soul just kind of adds them in. So Fullbringers just kind of started existing through the Soul King's will to create them for a new purpose which they will serve in given time. Now in the last video, I also mentioned how Ikome Kodomoe and Sozase don't make sense being clans in-game because of the sources of these names. The first being the creature Ikome Kodomoe, and the second being the Sozase is a corporation. Now actually Sozase could be a clan name because it's just a word really. So I mean, you can kind of like, if you were were to go back 1,000 years in time and just start your lineage, you could just make your last name anything. On the other hand, the explanation for Ikoma Kodomoe being a clan is because in some alternate reality, it was the name of an Arankar who passed it down through lineage. So in lore, or at least Type Soul's lore, maybe Ikoma Kodomoe, who was an Adjuchus, reached Arankar status instead of just being the most powerful Adjuchus being. So he could have reached the Arankar status instead of just being like a giant Menos. Now the title given to Cassie Fang, the Unohana, which is her title, is actually a title in Type Soul lore for the best medic in the Soul Society inspired by Unohana. So the best medic gets the title of the Unohana, kind of like how the strongest person in the Soul Society gets the title of Kenpachi in actual Bleach. So the title of Unohana is given to the best healing medic, while the title of Kenpachi is given to the strongest. Which, I mean, technically Kenpachi isn't the strongest in the verse, because like Ichigo and Aizen beat him, right? But it's like the most raw strength. Because like in Bleach, if Kenpachi were to like learn actual techniques, then he'd just be unstoppable. But with that being said, it kind of does show that, you know, that the owners of Type Soul haven't really read or watched Bleach. And I mean, this has been known, but it's also like they confuse Kenpachi for a name and then use Unohana as a title when Kenpachi is a title, and then Unohana is just a name. It doesn't mean anything. As for Hell, the lore of it is just multiversal bullshit, kinda. I'm pretty sure the Hellgates kinda just appeared because of the multiverse starting to fall apart and create new openings to different dimensions and universes, so now Hell is accessible for those whose souls are strong enough to go there without being sucked in forever, which is just anyone strong enough to obtain their mode, since that kinda represents the strength of your soul. And then being down in Hell strengthens you with harsh conditions, forcing you to adapt or die, and allowing you to ascend to a higher power and evolve, reaching your true form. So Sklave Rai, True Bankai, True Segunda, and the Twin Souls, even though, you know, Fullbringers can't actually go to Hell right now. Speaking of the Fullbringers, it's just kind of weird how they made it so like, oh, the Fullbringers didn't always exist, but the Soul King willed them into existence for a greater purpose that they will serve later down the line. I'm not gonna lie, just retconning them into the game and saying they always existed, just not playable, would have probably made more sense. I mean, that's kind of like what Bleach did. They kind of just appeared out of nowhere and they're like, oh yeah, we've always been here. It probably would have just made more sense. So that's basically all of the confirmed lore of Type Soul. As far as the Soul Reapers go, there really isn't that much different lore in comparison to the actual Soul Reapers. You kind of just replace people. The captain ranks and stuff are all just decided by strength and contribution, and they rotate as Soul Reaper captains retire, die, or in some cases, like Dadabak, defect to other factions like the Quincy's. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe. Check out my live channel and watch me on Twitch. Shout out to YouTube members Green, Brick, Pickle, Goobka, High Card, and Jersey Drake fan. I love you all. Have an amazing day, and goodbye.